Right. As promised, I'm going to now chat for a little bit. I had kind of two minds about whether to get a special guest in to talk about a particular element of Agile or education or something. But then I thought, just for the first time, for the first meeting, I'll just tell you why I'm here, effectively, and hopefully put across some of the passion, some of the faith and the belief that I have that we can do something radical here. And I'm going to delve a little deeper into kind of my views of education, which my personal views, but also my kind of understanding of how Agile might be able to fit into things. Most of these thoughts have been kind of floating around my head for quite some time. And while there may be disagreement on certain points, it seems that the concerns are mostly shared by other observers, not just here, but around the world. And I'm really pleased to see so many people from different parts of the world, because I think that just underlines the fact that it's not something that's just a UK problem, it's a worldwide problem to try and engage our young people so that they can enjoy their learning and end up being fitter and better equipped to deal with the modern world. So to begin with, I think it's worth considering where the roots of education systems lie. And much of it has its origins in the Industrial Revolution, not only well before the invention of computers and the internet, obviously, but before electricity was common. And I think it's worth just kind of pausing to appreciate that when our education system was created, there was no electricity in homes, there were no cars on the streets, no planes in the sky, no computers, no internet, no nothing. The world is a totally, radically different place, unrecognizable in so many ways, and yet the education system remains effectively unchanged. And since education was made compulsory in 1880, there have been numerous attempts at reform, but certainly in my kind of layman's view of it, they've mostly been concerned with kind of higher level organization, while they've kind of left the fundamentals of what takes place in the classroom untouched. And classes are still laid out in a kind of formal manner with focus on the teacher. And we rely primarily on the idea of, if you like, placing a wise adult in front of a bunch of children. And through a process of knowledge transfer, we kind of expect a group of wise young people to emerge. And we're teaching primarily segregated subjects. The system's also fundamentally tied to the concept of intelligence being measured only by academic success. And I guess this point is certainly less true now than it was when I was at school, but if a child performed poorly academically, they were considered thick. And hopefully that expression is never used these days, but I just wonder if the essence of that mindset might still linger. I don't know for sure, but possibly. And we certainly have this kind of idea of taking remedial action, and if you like, to kind of repair children who are academically broken. But there are, of course, many, many different facets to intelligence, and a great deal of value in the modern world in non-academic abilities. And I think we should be focusing on everything, the holistic view. And then that brings us to exams. When was the last time you used directly some subject knowledge that you learned at school in order to pass an exam? For the vast majority of adults, I suspect the answer is not since leaving the school gates on the last day of the final year. And I've certainly never had to rely on my knowledge that the angle between the hydrogen atoms in a water molecule is 104.5 degrees, or that I have to rely on my deep understanding of the properties of glacial sedimentary deposits. And except at parties, but for some reason I don't seem to get invited to many of those anymore. But apart from parties, never had to use that knowledge. And there's also a great deal of energy and effort spent learning how to pass exams. And while there are useful skills that you can pick up in the process, the same question applies. Since leaving school or college, when did you last have to take an exam? And for most of us, we rarely, if ever. And then there are league tables. Now, I can understand perhaps why they're appealing on the surface, but do they really help parents assess the suitability of school for their child? I'm not sure. And they certainly put a lot of downward pressure on the entire system, pressure on the schools to improve their results, put pressure on the teachers, put pressure on the children. Now, I mentioned Willie Winans earlier, and he's the teacher who's created a variation of Scrum called EduScrum, specifically for use in schools. And I was really privileged to have a call with him a couple of weeks ago. And the first thing I asked him was whether EduScrum was still growing or if it had reached some sort of plateau. And he said it wasn't growing, it was exploding. And it's reached over 30 countries, including China, India, Russia, and the USA. And one of the places where it's not yet caught on is the UK. And he explained that we were a little too conservative, and not uniquely, that we have this kind of institutional fear of failure. And that's quite concerning because in my kind of view of the world, failure is good. And failure is how we learn, failure is how we become better people. And all the successful Agile organizations out there depend upon fast failure to understand the products that they develop. And if we're raising children with a fear of failure, then we're going to be left behind in the modern world. They're going to be left behind and we're going to be left behind and businesses are going to get left behind. So to wrap this section up, I'm going to demonstrate my artistic prowess. And as I said, there are many more admirable traits aside from academic ability. And if you've got it, you should use it. So here we go. This is my, my attempt at using my artistic talents. It was supposed to be a funnel, but I realized it's more like a root vegetable. So I would like, ladies and gentlemen, to reveal for the first time ever a brand new concept, and that's the concept of the pressure parsnip. You are now able to say, I was there. So at the start of the parsnip, we see all sorts of different shapes and sizes of a child entering the system. And the pressure is fairly low at this stage, with lots of talk of growth mindset and other good stuff. But as the years progress, the pressure builds until we see a significant increase when children are faced with the 11+ exam. And then we find some young people dropping out of formal education at 16, and we say the system's failed them. And worse still, in many countries, including the UK, we regularly hear reports of the pressure of exams contributing to teenage suicides. Now, the system's kind of designed to produce academic clones out of all of the different types of children who enter at the start. But I think what it actually does is produce two sets of clones, got academically capable and the rest. And then there's also the question of whether or not either of these are preparing children appropriately to start working in modern agile businesses. And at this point, I need to make it incredibly, very, very clear that it is not the teachers who are at fault. The problem is with the system. But I believe that we've all, duty perhaps too strong a word, but I think it's great value if everyone questions every single one of these aspects. So I'm not saying that these are all the wrong way of doing things. I'm not saying that we have to throw them out altogether and completely revamp things. But what I'm saying is there is value in questioning every single one of these points and all the other points and ask ourselves, is there a better way of doing it? I believe the UK education system is perhaps no longer fit for purpose, as it is in many countries. But I also believe we have potential solutions, and all we really need is the courage to take the first steps. So that's kind of where I stand on education. A bit of a perhaps a preaching, I don't know, but I certainly have seen these ideas being talked about a huge huge deal all over the place. In fact, I didn't mention the organised by manufactured date, which is way back at the start. So many of you, I guess, may have heard, certainly those of you in education will have heard of Ken Robinson, Sir Ken Robinson. He's an absolutely brilliant communicator, and he's passionate about the need for us to reform education right across the world. And he made the point that schools are effectively organised by manufactured date, that we rely on this kind of idea of grouping kids that are the same age together because we think that they'll have more or less the same aptitude and capability. But I think we all know that it's hugely different, and particularly when you might have a year between the youngest and the oldest in a class, it kind of does make you wonder whether it could be done a different way. Maybe it could be, maybe it's too complicated to do it a different way, I don't know, but let's ask questions. So let's have a little look at the Agile side of things. Now, I think as I started with education, I look back at the origins of education. I think it's worth looking at the origins of Agile. And I appreciate there's some Agile practitioners around, so what's on this slide may well be second nature to you, but hopefully if you bear with me. Where did the Agile movement come from? Well, many of the elements originated in, or were at least influenced by, ideas from Toyota, developed during its recovery from World War II. However, I'm going to start our story in the thrilling and adrenaline-pumping world of software development in the 1970s. And the majority of software around the world was developed using something called the waterfall methodology. And it basically comprised of a series of sequential phases, each one taking weeks or even months to complete. First of all, you'd have requirements being gathered from the customer and documented, and then they pass that document on to a new team who would analyze and come up with a system design document. They pass that on to the coders, who would then spend weeks or months churning out code. And then they pass that on to the testers, who would do the testing, and then it would be passed on to a team to actually deploy the code into production. Now, one critical problem with this approach is in the test phase. It's only at this point where many of the bugs and other issues are identified, and this results in having to rewind the process back to earlier parts, to earlier phases. Now, another big issue with the waterfall method is that a usable product is only delivered at the end of the project. And consequently, the resources and the people's time and effort invested in the development realize no value at all until then. The timeline for larger projects can stretch to several years, during which the supplier and the customer see no return at all on their investment. Now, there is an argument that a detailed plan up front is needed in a complex project in order to organize the available resources and people effectively. But at the start of a project, there are many unknowns which make it near impossible to plan accurately. For example, we can't accurately predict the capacity of the teams as it ebbs and flows throughout the project. We can't estimate the impact of unforeseen technical challenges, other than saying that they will occur. We can't predict how issues in one area will impact another, or how effective the communication is going to be between individuals, teams, and phases. And we can't depend on the customer accurately understanding, communicating their own needs at the start of the project. And we certainly can't predict what their needs are going to be many months later when the project is supposed to be delivered. So the methodology also has numerous pressure points that cause immense stress, with projects being delivered late, over budget, cancelled, staff working long hours, and being under great stress. So something had to happen. In 2001, there were 17 IT professionals who gathered for a conference in a ski lodge in Utah, and they were determined to pool their experiences and propose a better way. And they came up with the Agile Manifesto. I'll very briefly show you the first page from the manifesto website. For example, they declared that working software was more value to them than comprehensive documentation. So it doesn't mean don't document, it just means that there's more value in having something working than having it documented. And similarly, it's far more valuable to be able to respond quickly to change than following a plan religiously just because it's a plan. So there were lots of influences that entered the cauldron during that meeting. But two ideas have kind of come to dominate the IT and the wider business world. Firstly, the term and concept Agile, which in itself is quite controversial, which we'll maybe talk about on another day, and the framework called Scrum. One of the frameworks, one of the foundations of many of the Agile ideas that went into that melting pot was the theory of empiricism. And that's the idea that knowledge comes only from sensory experience. So how does this realization help us kind of reduce the impact of all of these unknowns? Well, we can begin by creating a small, self-organized, multidisciplinary team responsible for doing all of the designing, the coding and the testing of the product. And then, rather than looking at the entire mountain and attempting to plan in great detail in advance, we start with a small chunk or an increment. The one thing that will deliver the most value to the customer. And then we build it and we deliver it for the customer to use. By inspecting and using the product increment, we learn about it, and this gives us valuable information that we can then take into account when we build the next increment. And this creates a repeating cycle of feedback loops. These are typically called sprints because they last no more than 4 weeks, often just 1 or 2. And at the end of each sprint, something of value is delivered to the customer. If it isn't, and the wrong turning is being taken, then the cost is at most 4 weeks of effort. So by using evolutionary delivery and a cycle of continuous improvement, we end up delivering real value to the customer in significantly less time than via the traditional approach. And this is effectively what the Scrum framework provides. So I guess those Agile practitioners out there, most of this was kind of common knowledge. But let's just move on now to progressive thinking. Thanks to Luke Edwards for popping the term in my head, because I was struggling to kind of think of Agile, the widest umbrella that you can think of, covering as many different angles. And I guess what Luke suggested kind of puts in a better nutshell, progressive thinking. So let's have a little look at some of the ideas that I think can kind of help out with this mission to be beneficial in schools and classrooms. Scrum is a good, obvious starting point. And again, because I know many of you will be familiar with Scrum, I will just very, very briefly have a little look at the way it works. This is one of these fantastic diagrams from a group called the Liberators, who I'll mention in a short while. But the long and short is that we have a product owner who's responsible for maintaining the product backlog. And that's basically an ordered list of the things that need to be built. And then at the start of each sprint, the team agree the subset of tasks that are going to be worked on and a plan for delivering them. And that's called the sprint planning meeting. And then every single day, they have a daily scrum, which is a time box meeting in which they update one another on the progress towards the sprint goal and identify any blockers that need attention. Then at the end of the sprint, there's a review meeting in which the increment is inspected by interested stakeholders, and any lessons learned are then fed back to adjust the product backlog in future sprints. And then finally, there's a retrospective, which is held for the team to identify areas for improvement. So while Scrum is typically used for software development, it's a generic framework, and it's really, really good at being used in all sorts of complex environments. In fact, it's increasingly being used in other areas of business outside IT. As I mentioned, it's already been used in classroom teaching, and most famously through EduScrum, which was Willie Wyman's project. I'm not going to go into detail about EduScrum itself today because I think it's such an important element, and it's really, we need to give it justice by spending at least one session on it so that we can learn about that. And I'm also very hopeful that Willie will be able to come and talk to us. He's very, very interested in the community project, and he's really, really generous with his time. He's already said he hopes to be able to pop along to one of our meetings. So if I can get him there to talk directly to you, I think that'll be absolutely fantastic. So as well as Scrum, I think there are all sorts of progressive ideas that could help make schools more effective and relevant. For example, concept of the Kanban board, which if those of you aren't familiar with it, it's again something that comes from Toyota. But in its simplest form, it's 3 lists, a to-do list or a backlog, doing or in progress, and a done column. And tasks are represented on the board by tickets, which are then moved from left to right as the work is completed. The board can be electronic, but it's often very effective in a physical form with post-it notes and the like. Now, the reason why I think it's so important to have a wider vision of progressive thinking in education rather than just talking about EduScrum or just talking about Scrum is that Kanban, for example, could be implemented almost immediately, very easily in almost any classroom to allow anyone to see progress on a topic or a subject, whether they're the kids, the teachers, the parents. So we don't have to be frightened of having to make huge changes. There are benefits to progressive thinking right the way from top to bottom, all over the place. There's the lean movement. So I won't go into detail about that, but in basic terms, it's removing waste, so making processes more efficient. So there's all kinds of ways where that can be effective and helpful in the school and college environment. And this is one of my favorites, which I think is, it's not perhaps traditionally considered an Agile component, but it's certainly a huge potential benefit. And it's based on the idea of combining small, simple icons with text to represent ideas. And by including the visual element, we're kind of lighting up both sides of the brain, making the notes come alive. And it's absolutely fantastic, not just for taking personal notes, but also for when you're presenting like I am now, but also for facilitating complex problem solving. And although it's a skill that takes a lifetime to master, it's once again very, very easy to make a start. In fact, much easier than it may appear. So the potential benefits for teachers and children and everybody is absolutely huge. And I've only been sketchnoting or visual thinking for a month, about 2 or 3 months now, but it's really changed the way I approach making notes, and it really does kind of light the brain up and make you feel energized as you're doing it. So I can't recommend that more. I do need to, in case I forget, I need to just mention that the guy who taught me sketchnoting, a guy called Yuri, extremely talented guy, he's designed a banner for us to use in our meetups, and that went live today. So I'll have if I do recall, I'll have a little look at I'll show you the banner at the end of the meeting if we've got time, and also drop you details of his course if anybody's interested in picking up on it. We've also got this idea of design thinking, which is a human-centered process for creative problem solving, which I don't know a great deal about, but I think it's another extremely good candidate for dropping in the melting pot. And I've mentioned the Liberators earlier. They are an organisation who've put together a fantastic resource of things called liberating structures. which are for facilitating collaboration. So lots of different ways to get people to talk and to share ideas and to build on ideas rather than just having a simple meeting. So all of these really, really good ideas. And I think Agile is successful in business, but for every success story, there are tales of struggle and ultimate failure. And I think part of the reason for this is that it's not sufficient to rigidly follow a tick list of steps and just hope that, like a magic wand, it's going to transform your existence. And I think the success of Agile initiatives depends more than anything on the adoption of an appropriate mindset. Many of the frameworks and techniques under the Agile umbrella include reference to values that need to exist in order to achieve success. And I think that the same values and mindset will need to be adopted for progressive thinking to be successful in education. And appreciate that that's really one of the major big challenges to overcome. To have this need to change someone's mindset is really challenging. But I think there's every reason to think that if we take the kind of community approach, take it step by step, one chunk at a time, that we can do that together with all the other initiatives that are going on that you'll see in just a moment. Just a couple of extra topics I'd like to just go over before I move on to our vision session. I think we've got a wonderful opportunity to make a difference in so many ways. And the potential benefits of introducing Agile are kind of immense and far-reaching. And I think it's worth just trying to imagine, I feel like John Lennon here, or break out into song in a moment. Imagine being able to enable every single child and young person in the country to reach their full potential, to see them consistently engaged and motivated to learn. And I just wonder what it would be like if we could improve their health by reducing the persistent stress of exams and maybe revitalizing what many of them think are a demotivating, disengaging, kind of irrelevant environment. And just think if we could actually give them the courage to give and receive feedback and develop this healthy attitude to failure instead. What happens if they were comfortable with change and they were creative and they were happy? I think schools really ought to be preparing our kids for life rather than just for exams, so that they can get better equipped as kind of adults in the modern world. So it's kind of, again, a bit of a preach, but I think it's good to have these things as a vision, things that we would, I'm sure, all love to see. And the evidence that's coming out of the work with Edge Scrum and other similar frameworks is that it is possible to achieve these things. It's difficult, but it is possible. And it's really, really exciting to think that this is possible. There aren't only benefits for pupils, benefits exist for teachers. I think this is going to be a big challenge to be able to get as many teachers as we can on board when they're obviously, I guess, going to be suspicious of Agile practitioners coming along and saying, you know, this is how you should teach. And that's not really what I want to say. Really, I just want to give an opportunity for teachers to be able to discover that there are these things out there and hopefully help them if they want to take that plunge. But yeah, so there's this idea that teachers perhaps can really be empowered to unlock the potential of every single child, because they will have the opportunity to become perhaps a mentor or a coach or a facilitator, rather than just standing up and lecturing, if you like. Obviously, if we're getting happier and less stressed kids, we're getting happier and less stressed families, which can't be too bad. The schools, hopefully there's a potential there that they can fail fast. In other words, they can react faster to the changing world. The community hopefully will benefit, being able to have closer integration with schools, because if we're talking about business and how businesses work, there's plenty of opportunity for close integration between the businesses working in the communities and the schools. And then, of course, the businesses are going to benefit because they're going to have the young people leaving education with the skills and confidence to contribute to society and already able to talk Scrum and Kanban and Agile and to be able to do all of these things confidently. One final slide to look at the evidence, and this is just a small subset of the countries who are already working on Agile progressive thinking in education. And most of these are probably EduScrum. As I say, there's 30 countries that are involved in EduScrum. And Willie was telling me a couple of days ago that in Russia, they've trained up 1,000 teachers already, and they have 4 full-time staff helping to train up teachers in Russia. And there's all sorts of stories like that, where EduScrum and Agile thinking in general is being embraced. In Australia, I don't believe they're using EduScrum, but they have their own Agile approach, and I believe there's 200 schools signed up to that. So it is happening, and it's not easy, it's tough, but it is happening, and there is plenty of evidence of it making a big difference to kids all around the world. There are things going on in the UK. It's possible that there's one gentleman who had a project in Wolverhampton a few years back called Scrummy School, and he hopefully will be able to join us in a few weeks' time. He couldn't make it today. So there are some excellent ideas flourishing in the UK, but I think it'd be absolutely brilliant if we can help stoke that and make it go a little bit further. So just closing up my little slot. Why am I here personally? Well, I believe that we need to do something with our education system to make it suitable for the modern world. And I'm not the only one who says that. And we're not the only nation who feels it's necessary to do something with education. And I think we should explore the potential of embracing an agile or progressive mindset within education. And I don't think we need to wait for a directive from above. When it comes, it'll be brilliant, but I think we can take some small steps ourselves and see what happens. And I think that's the light bulb moment for me, was to realize that, you know, I live and breathe agile at work. So why not take this problem, this big complex challenge we've got as an agile challenge, take a small step, watch it, learn from it, get some feedback, and then decide what to do next. And who knows what can happen? Anything. So that's really a